Captain America Brave New World begins with Harrison Ford's Thaddeus Ross talking to one of his agents. He instantly asks about Betty, which is actually the first time she's been mentioned in the MCU, before going up to make his first speech since becoming President of the United States. During the speech, he mentions the blip, as well as the massive celestial sticking out of the ocean. Finally, for the first time in the 22 projects released since Eternals. The main theme of the speech is togetherness, something which reporters obviously question as Ross was directly involved with the events of The Incredible Hulk, Civil War, and Infinity War films, as well as obviously tearing apart the Avengers. They cut to flashbacks after this of Ross during the Incredible Hulk film, but updated to be Harrison Ford, mustache and all, which was a nice touch and didn't look totally ridiculous. After the speech, we see Captain America for the first time. He's on a covert mission to retrieve a package, but decides to completely ignore the covert element of it, landing in the middle of a bunch of mercenaries known as the Serpents, using a sonic fucking boom and beating the shit out of anyone left over. While Sam's searching for the package, it cuts to a scene of Sidewinder in a facility. Now, you'll notice with Sidewinder throughout the film that he interacts with pretty much no main or important characters apart from Sam. Now, Giancarlo Esposito, the actor playing Sidewinder, was added at the last minute to replace Seth Rollins, the wrestler, as the character, and it does show, to be honest. He only really interacts with Sam and a group of mercenaries throughout the entire film. He's acted well, but he didn't really have much to do other than just provide a ridiculous amount of exposition throughout the entire film whenever Sam needed to figure anything out, basically. Sidewinder is interrogating hostages to try and find out the location of the package, which we find out is adamantium stolen from the Japanese. And Sam comes to rescue them and fight Sidewinder, keeping him busy while he uses Red Wing to take out the rest of the mercenaries and free the hostages. While fighting Sidewinder, Sam is surprised attacked by an absolute unit of a serpent soldier. If it wasn't for the vibranium suit, Sam would have been absolutely ripped to shreds in this fight, but even with the tech, it's still a challenge for Sam. Which it shouldn't be considering how overpowered vibranium is in the MCU, and I'm pretty sure the Serpent wasn't a super soldier. But Sam eventually gets one up on him, beats him, and breaks his arm while he's down, and makes a little quip. But in all fairness, the guy had just tried to kill him, so fair play. Ross goes to visit his wife's grave with an agent and discusses with them the events of the Incredible Hulk film and how Betty no longer speaks with him, as she feels he hasn't changed since then. He's hoping to prove her wrong and show he has changed and wants to improve the world by agreeing a treaty to share the adamantium from the newly named Celestial Island with other nations. We cut back to Sam and Joaquin, who are discussing who the buyer of the package may have been and whether the servants have been played, before Sam surprises Joaquin by taking him to see the forgotten Captain America, Isaiah Bradley. Sam and Isaiah do some training, with Joaquin making the odd joke in the background, before Sam gets a call from the president. Isaiah is visibly unhappy about this and explains after the call to Sam that he doesn't know how he can work with and report to someone who had previously hunted him and his friends. Sam's response is that he knows Ross won't change, but it's better to have someone in the room with eyes on. Sam explains that Ross called him to invite him to the White House as a guest of honor, but he only agreed if the invite was extended to Isaiah as well. Sam, Isaiah, and Joaquin arrive in a limo to the Celestial Island World Summit, and when they get there, Sam gets pulled to one side to go and speak to Ross. During the conversation, Ross tells Sam he was told to lose the mustache or lose the election, explaining the new look, before asking Sam to help him rebuild the Avengers. Sam's obviously hesitant considering Ross helped tear them apart in the first place, but after Ross says that he's viewing things differently since he's become president, he agrees to think about it. During the summit, we find out that various countries try to claim the Celestials' resources for their own. Ross calls the element found at the Celestial the find of the century and describes it as more indestructible than vibranium, and finally names adamantium into the MCU. Their plan from the treaty is to produce enough adamantium from the Celestial to distribute around the world so that each country has access. Suddenly, the song Mr. Blue starts playing, which is a subtle bit of foreshadowing, and Isaiah suddenly gets up, disarms a guard, and fires at the president until the glass breaks in front of him, but stops before killing him. Four other armed personnel in the room are also affected, and a shootout starts, but the president is escorted out. Sam chases after Bradley, catching up to him outside. Isaiah doesn't seem to know what's going on and understandably doesn't want to go back to jail for crimes he didn't commit, or at least think he did. But after being surrounded, he reluctantly surrenders and breaks down crying. While being detained on the floor, he's worried about his nice suit getting damaged, having revealed in the limo on the way up to the summit that this was the suit he got married in. Sam barges into Ross's meeting and the president orders everyone except his head of security, Ruth, to leave the room. The three of them discuss the information they have on the incident, and after a debate between Sam and Ruth on what actually happened, Ross picks Ruth to lead the investigation and orders Sam to stay away. He tells Sam that his offer to work alongside him expired when his friend tried to kill him. Sam and Ruth both leave the room, and we see Ross taking some medication in secret. I'm sure this is going to come back up later. Sam goes to visit Isaiah in jail, even though he isn't allowed. The guards allowed him 5 minutes with him, even though he's at risk of being court-martialed for doing so. Isaiah explains that he doesn't know what happened, but his phone was on the fritz when they got to the summit, and then he was sitting at the summit listening before next thing he was surrounded by agents outside talking to Sam. Isaiah's acting was really good in this scene, he really conveyed the emotion well. So it turns out the guard that let Sam see Isaiah had actually double-crossed him and he was working for Ruth. Ruth finds out from the guard that Sam saw Isaiah and gets the footage from the meeting. She watches that as well as the CCTV from before the attack and notices that Isaiah's phone was flashing as well as the phones of the other four shooters, which means that that was definitely the cause of the supposed mind control. We briefly cut to Ross, who calls a military black site and asks if the guard he's speaking to has eyes on the prisoner, to which the guard responds he does, but then the camera pans round to show that he's staring at a wall. There's obviously some sort of mind control plot going on, and the prisoner is the suspect and the buyer who purchased the serpents to get the package from the Japanese. Speaking of the serpents, we now go to another of Giancarlo Esposito's glued on scenes. Sidewinder attacks Sam in his car, blowing up the car with him inside. Sidewinder radios in that Sam is eliminated before saying, await for confirmation of death, which seems pretty stupid to me. Surely you'd get the confirmation before radioing it in the first place, but that's just me. As Sidewinder walks up to the car, Sam comes from nowhere and attacks Sidewinder. We get another fight scene where Sam gets stabbed twice, once in his chest or shoulder and once in his stomach. He carries on fighting with the blade still sticking out of his body and barely seems to be affected. Sam knocks out Sidewinder and answers the call on Sidewinder's phone from the buyer. We find out immediately that the buyer is all about stats and probabilities, saying that if Sam had survived the grenade, there was a 77% chance he would have tried to talk Sidewinder down rather than attack without his gear. Oh yeah, Sam got stabbed without his gear and armour. They did add a line later on to say that the clothes had vibranium weaving, but if that was the case, surely the knives wouldn't have cut through it like Koff and wounded him so bad that he needed bandaging up and was still bleeding through shortly after. Anyway, now, anyone who's watched and remembers the Incredible Hulk film from 2008 will possibly have realised from this call that the villain of this film is the leader, or Samuel Stearns, the scientist who helped Banner under the alias Mr. Blue, hence the song used to mind control Isaiah and the others earlier, and towards the end of the film got Banner's blood into a wound on his head. Back with Ross, and he's having a Zoom call with the world leaders from his bunker as the treaty for the Celestial Island resources is in danger after the attack on Ross's life. Ross is trying to convince various countries to stay on board and be patient, but with Japan going ghost on them, they want Ross to get them back on board ASAP and agree to remain patient for now while he does so. Going against Ruth's advice, who we actually find out is an ex-widow, Ross decides to leave the bunker and fly to Japan to meet with their leader and try to get them back on board with the treaty. Sam and Joaquin are reviewing footage from the shooting, and they seem to realise that it didn't look like the shooters wanted Ross dead, as Isaiah had a clear opportunity to take the shot but didn't. They also managed to pinpoint the black site that the leader called them from, so they gather all the gear and go to confront him. Ruth goes to speak to the agents who were mind controlled along with Isaiah, but just before she gets to the cells, the guard has also been mind controlled and shoots all four of the shooters, only leaving Isaiah left. We briefly see a phone call between the leader and Ross, where the leader tells Ross that he only wanted to get his life back, but seeing as Ross hasn't let him, it's now too late and he's making his own choices, before seeing Isaiah get put into solitary confinement for his own protection. Cap and Falcon head to the base the leader is being kept in. They sneak into the base, narrowly avoiding the guards, and see that there's been a lab set up in the facility. In the lab, there's paperwork all over the walls for the people involved in the shooting, as well as of the president, as well as paperwork for the president as well. There's kind of the various documents as well as health data for Ross in the lab. Immediately when I saw this, I thought, okay, the leader's probably providing the medication to Ross that we saw earlier, and it's probably altered them to cause Ross to turn into the Red Hulk later in the film. It's not really a spoiler, it was in the trailers. And surprise, surprise, that was 100% correct. Ross meets with Japan's leader, who accuses Ross of orchestrating the Japan's adamantium being stolen, planning to steal it, and then sending in Captain America to retrieve it, act like the saviors to look good, and get what they want with the treaty. Ross has no idea what he's talking about, but Japan's leader doesn't believe him and walks away. Cap and Falcon are snooping around the military base trying to find out more about the leader before the leader reveals himself. He looks okay, not amazing. It kind of just looks like his brain has gone a bit mouldy and is kind of poking through his skull. The leader tells Sam that Ross knows that the leader is behind all of this and is still keeping Isaiah prisoner to keep up appearances. Then another fight scene begins. Sam's getting shocked to hell, and again, it barely affects him. Ruth, who also figured out the location and is kind of coming round on the mind control idea, also joins the fight and helps Sam and Joaquin escape. Between the three of them, they think that Japan might be right and Ross or someone else in the government might be behind this, so they go to find the breach in the government. During a conversation with his staff about the Japan situation, Ross seems a bit ill and out of it as he discusses the situation with them, and he starts to get angry as he decides to take control of Japan's adamantium. He thinks that if only one country can have adamantium, then it should be America. When this is brought up that this will plunge them into war, he responds that he was a wartime general and now he's a wartime president. You can definitely notice Ross changing at this point in the film, and I think this line of dialogue is there to kind of show to the audience that he's now less bothered about looking like he's changed to Betty and seemingly more interested in going to war for the adamantium solely to help the US rather than helping the whole world as was his original plan. So Sam is at a different military black site, and it turns out he actually stole some of the meds from the leader that the leader was providing to Ross to have them analysed. While Sam's at the base, we find out this is where they're holding Sidewinder, who wants full immunity or at least a reduced sentence before he talks. He eventually gives in and talks anyway, without Sam really kind of promising him anything. He tells Sam about the leader's backstory and how Ross framed him for the events of the Incredible Hulk film. Since then, Ross has been holding him prisoner and used him more as a personal think tank, as needed as help to cure his heart condition. Ross provided the lab in the facility and promised that it would free Stearns when he became president. Since Ross hasn't lived up to his promise, the leader's now gone rogue and is getting his own back on him. He explains how the leader used a CIA account in order to pay the Serpents to steal Japan's adamantium in order to frame Ross and tarnish his reputation. This all leads to a conflict between the USA and Japan at Celestial Island, consisting of about a handful of jets and half a dozen ships at most. Ruth and Sam go to meet with Ross at the conflict, with Ross being angry that Sam's there after he'd ordered him away from the investigation. Sam and Ross go to talk alone, where Sam tells Ross that the leader was behind all of this. Ross doesn't let on that he already knows, so Sam confronts him about going to see him regularly and having regular contact. To which Ross explains that after the leader took the fall for the events of the Incredible Hulk, he used him to survive, so that he could hopefully change Betty's opinion of him, slightly expanded on what the Sidewinder had told him. Back to Celestial Island, and the leaders mind controlled the two American F-18 pilots and caused them to fire on the ships, which has driven Cap and Falcon to suit up. Japan return fire, and Ross and the Japanese leader have a phone call which goes south, which starts to tip Ross over the edge. At this point, he's been getting progressively angrier throughout the film. He then gets a call from the leader, who's antagonising him and reveals he wants to turn Ross into a monster and eventually get him to destroy the fleet and kill Captain America, showing the world the monster that he really is. Ross does manage to keep control, but while this is going on, Falcon gets injured while trying to save the Japanese jets and fleet from the mind controlled Americans after getting a bit too cocky in his abilities. He does get rescued from the ocean, but he's in critical condition and needed his heart restarting. Bucky shows up to see Sam at the hospital while visiting Joaquin, and they have a conversation about whether Sam should have taken the super soldier serum. Sam thinks he failed when he let the leader get away and thinks Steve made a mistake in picking him, but Bucky disagrees, saying that he chose Sam because he's the person that he is and not the strongest person. But surely, if that's the case, as it was with Steve, there'd be no problem with Sam taking the serum, as it would just make him more of who he is anyway. And not only that, but it'd help explain fight scenes easier without him having to adopt different pieces of tech from various different heroes in the MCU, primarily Black Panther. Anyway, Sam and Bucky share a couple of laughs before Bucky says he has to leave to go to a campaign fundraiser. Turns out Bucky's running for Congress, which, okay. Not sure how we'll get away with that being part of the Thunderbolts and being in Congress, but hey, that's Thunderbolts' problem. Bucky leaves and Ruth comes into the room after drooling over Bucky. She tells Sam that not only is Bradley still in lockup, but the pills that Ross has been taking have been loaded with gamma radiation, explaining for the five people that haven't caught on yet how Ross was going to turn into the Red Hulk. Ross calls Betty, who it turns out hadn't even bothered to call her own dad after he was shot at, which is a dick move if you ask me. And he explains that he's trying to change for the better, and actually to her rather than to his staff, and that he wants to see her. She agrees, and Harrison Ford actually shows a lot of emotion in this scene with some really good acting. Even at 80, he's still got it. Bravo, sir. They only have a brief convo before Ross goes to make a speech. Meanwhile, the leader shows up to Sam in the street and says he's now forced to turn himself in order to get what he wants, for the world to see Ross as the monster and destroy his legacy. At the speech, the media start to question Ross over his handling of the Japan situation, as well as the leaks that he had orchestrated the Serpent stealing the adamantium to begin with. Then, the most stupid thing in the entire film happens. One of the journalists tells Ross that the leader has turned himself in, which had happened less than 5 minutes prior, and he's still on the street as he says it. The reporter actually holds up a news article on the phone about the event that was currently ongoing, saying that he turned himself in. Did the reporter time travel? What the fuck is going on? The leader then plays a recording of him talking over the speakers at the speech, and I can't remember the exact content of the speech, but obviously something related to Ross, which pushes Ross over the edge until he starts to transform. The transformation looked pretty cool in all fairness, probably the best use of CGI in the entire movie, and Captain America turns up while Red Hulk and the Secret Service agents are going at it. The legendary Marvel final battle begins. So I didn't want to go through the entire fight scene bit by bit because it would be quite boring. So here are the notable points. One punch from Red Hulk results in an ungodly build-up of kinetic energy in Sam's suit. Red Hulk knows how to thunderclap too. The White House is basically destroyed by the Red Hulk during the fight, as well as the Washington Monument being damaged after Sam lures in there. Sam stores an extremely large amount of spike projectiles in his suit, seemingly unending. Sam lures Ross to the cherry blossom trees where he used to take Betty as a kid in order to try and calm him down, which doesn't work, but it wasn't the worst idea. Red Hulk goes into a rage and starts repeatedly punching Sam's wings, which are operating as a shield, each punch seeming to do no real damage to the wings, not even a dent really. But soon after, he manages to crumple the wings and completely tear one of them off. Please, somebody make that make sense. Sam uses his remaining wing to stab and slice Ross before stabbing it into his stomach and using the kinetic shockwave. Somehow that still doesn't stop him, so Sam decides to resort to the only thing he has left with how injured he is and try and talk him down. Somehow, this is the scene that manages to have the worst special effects shot in the entire film. Sam's just basically stood there talking to Ross, but he's been superimposed onto the background in the worst way possible. And it's the first time the CGI actually took me out of the film. It just purely looks like he stood in front of a green screen. It's absolutely horrendous. I'm not sure if they managed to use the volume or if it was just green screen, but considering he was just stood in front of a bit of rubble on the street, I can't believe that that is the worst special effects shot in the entire film. It blows my mind. Sam again tries to calm the Red Hulk down by talking about Betty and reminding him about the cherry blossoms, and eventually manages to return Ross back to his human form. Ross gets put on oxygen and ends up getting taken away, and we also find out that the leader has been taken to the raft, and Isaiah has finally been released. Sam immediately goes to meet him straight from the fight. After Sam takes Isaiah home from jail, we move forward to Sam at the raft, who's gone to visit Ross, who's actually being held there after the incident, as well as the leader. Sam tells him that the leader used the pills to supply him with the gamma radiation and steadily increased the dose as time went on. Ross has now given up office and is actually happy to be confined there, so he knows he isn't a danger to anyone and they can let America move on from the whole thing. Sam reveals to Ross that Japan has agreed to the treaty, which is now known as the Celestial Accords, and Japan has put Ross's name in the Accords as well. Betty then shows up at the raft as Sam leaves and starts to catch up with her dad, and that's where we leave Ross for the rest of the film. The last scene of the movie is Sam visiting Joaquin in hospital, who's now awake. Falcon actually sees his mistakes and thinks he messed up, being quite hard on himself for what happened, which I thought was a nice little bit of character work, to be honest with you. Sam reveals that he's going to restart the Avengers, assuming that offer's still on the table now Ross isn't president. Not sure what the new president will think of that. And we close with Sam and Joaquin having a bit of a laugh about Falcon getting a new Wakandan suit. There's only one post-credit scene in the film which shows Sam in the raft, but going to visit the leader. The scene is basically just a tease for the upcoming Avengers movies, Doomsday and Secret Wars. The leader's basically saying some stuff about how this isn't the only world and we need to protect this world from other worlds, and that he's seen all this stuff in the probabilities and stuff like that. Sure, bro. So that's the end of my plot walkthrough for Captain America Brave New World. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. This is my first ever video, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. I can't imagine the production quality is going to be very good, especially on the visual side. But I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, obviously please click like and subscribe to get me underway. In terms of what's to come, I am planning to post a proper review of Captain America at some point where I go a bit more into my own opinions of the film rather than kind of just going through the film in order. And there'll probably be a Marvel tier list coming at some point soon after that, and then I'm planning to primarily cover Marvel and DC moving forward. Potentially a bit of Star Wars and Doctor Who thrown in the mix as well. I do have a full time job and I'm learning this as I go, so I can't promise massively regular uploads, but I am trying to upload as frequently as possible, especially when new films and series are going to come out. Right, that's enough from me. Have a good one, guys, and I'll see you next time.